The 3 wolf pups were already taking their final breaths when the hated Omega found them buried beneath the frozen roots of a fallen tree. Everyone in the village had warned her never to touch wolves from the northern forest, but she wrapped all 3 in her only cloak and carried them home. She thought she was saving 3 helpless animals. She had no idea they were the Alpha King's missing sons, or that the man responsible for their disappearance was already coming for them. The first wolf pup was already dying when Mara heard it scratching beneath the snow. She almost walked past. The sound was so faint that it could have been a branch rubbing against the frozen ground, or a rabbit trapped beneath a drift. The northern forest made strange noises after sunset. Trees groaned beneath the weight of ice. Wind slipped between the black branches and whispered through the pines. Sometimes wolves howled from the mountains, and sometimes the sound seemed so close that villagers bolted their doors before nightfall. But this sound was different. Scratch. Silence. Scratch. Mara stopped with one hand wrapped around the handle of her basket. Snow drifted through the branches above her, settling softly against her dark wool cloak. Evening had already swallowed the last grey light between the trees. Her fingers were numb, and the small bundle of winter herbs in her basket was hardly worth the trouble of coming this far into the forest. Still, she turned. "Hello." Only wind answered. Mara crouched and brushed snow away from the roots of an enormous pine. Beneath the white blanket, she found a narrow opening between the tree's exposed roots. 2 pale eyes stared back at her. Mara's breath caught. A wolf pup. No more than a few months old. Its fur was silver-grey beneath the frost, and one front paw was pinned beneath a broken branch. Blood had frozen into the fur around its leg. "Oh!" She lowered herself onto her knees. The pup did not growl. That frightened her more than a growl would have. Wild wolves feared people. Everyone in Frostmere knew that. They stayed deep in the northern woods, away from farms and roads, and the villagers were taught from childhood never to approach them. But this little creature was too weak even to be afraid. Mara pushed her hands into the narrow space. The branch was heavier than it looked. She tried once. Nothing. She tried again, digging her boots into the snow. The branch shifted a little. The pup whimpered. "Hold on." Her voice sounded strangely gentle in the empty forest. She pushed again. The branch rolled away. The pup dragged itself forward, but another sound came from beneath the roots. A tiny cry. Mara froze. Then she heard it again. And again. There was more than one. She pulled away the snow with both hands. 2 more pups were trapped farther beneath the fallen pine. One was curled against the other, barely moving. The third had its eyes closed. Mara stared at them. 3 helpless creatures in a forest where the temperature would soon fall below freezing. She knew what would happen if she left them. The cold would finish what the tree had started. She also knew what would happen if anyone found her with them. The villagers already hated her. They had hated her since childhood. Mara was an Omega, born at the bottom of Frostmere's old social order. When a cow died, someone blamed an Omega. When a storm destroyed a roof, someone whispered that an Omega had brought bad luck. When wolves appeared near the village, people looked toward Mara's cottage. She had learned not to defend herself. She had learned to lower her eyes. She had learned that silence was sometimes the only thing that kept cruel people from finding another reason to hurt her. But she could not leave the pups. Not like this. Mara pulled off her cloak. The cold struck her immediately. She wrapped the smallest pup first, then carefully freed the other 2. The largest was breathing. Barely. The third pup's body was so cold that Mara pressed it against her chest beneath her dress and ran toward home. Snow tore across her face. Branches scratched her cheeks. Her boots filled with ice. She did not stop. By the time the crooked little cottage appeared beyond the trees, darkness had settled over the valley. Mara kicked the door shut behind her and hurried to the hearth. She laid the pups beside the dying fire. "No, no." She rubbed their frozen bodies with warm cloth. Her hands trembled. The smallest pup did not move. Mara fed another log into the fireplace. Then another. Then another. She crushed winterroot and mountain mint into a bowl, mixed them with warm water, and carefully pressed the cloth against the pups' mouths. Minutes passed. Then more. The fire crackled. Wind pushed against the shutters. Mara kept working. She did not know that hundreds of miles away, in a royal fortress surrounded by snow-covered walls, an alpha king had spent 2 years refusing to let his children's names be carved into the stone of the dead. She did not know that 3 royal heirs had vanished in these same mountains. She did not know that soldiers had searched these forests until their horses collapsed. She did not know that somewhere in the darkness, another wolf was already following the scent of the pups. All Mara knew was that 3 small hearts were still beating. So she stayed beside them. Near midnight, the largest pup moved. Mara looked up. Its eyes opened. For a moment, neither moved. Then the wolf slowly stretched its neck. Its black nose touched Mara's trembling hand. She stopped breathing. The pup closed its eyes again. Mara smiled through tears she had not realized were there. Outside the cottage, a wolf howled. Then another answered. Then another. The sounds traveled through the forest toward the mountains. And far away, inside a stone fortress, the Alpha King suddenly woke from sleep. For the first time in years, Mara's cottage did not feel empty. It was still small. Still crooked. Still cold around the windows. But 3 little bodies had filled the room with movement. The largest pup slept beside the hearth, its paws twitching whenever it dreamed. The smallest followed Mara everywhere. When she crossed the room, it followed. When she carried water, it followed. When she sat at the table, it rested its chin on her knee. The third was different. A white crescent marked its chest, and it spent long stretches sitting beside the window, staring toward the mountains. Mara noticed everything. She noticed the way the pups reacted whenever wolves howled outside. She noticed that they never fought over food. She noticed that the largest always allowed the smallest to eat first. And she noticed something else. They were listening. Not merely hearing. Listening. When Mara spoke, their ears moved. When footsteps passed outside, all 3 became still. When she sang softly while preparing herbs, the smallest pup sometimes lifted its head as though the sound reminded it of something. On the 4th morning, Mara woke to find the 3 pups standing around her bed. She opened one eye. "Why are you all staring at me?" The largest tilted its head. The smallest climbed onto the blanket. Mara laughed quietly. It was the first time she had laughed in a very long time. Then the laughter disappeared. Something silver lay on the floor. Mara picked it up. It was a pendant. Old. Cold. Beautifully carved. At its center was the symbol of Frostmere's royal house, a crowned wolf surrounded by 3 stars. Mara stared at it. Her fingers tightened around the chain. Everyone in the kingdom knew that crest. It was stamped on royal coins. Carved above the palace gates. Sewn into the banners carried by the king's soldiers. She looked at the pups. "No." The word escaped as a whisper. She lifted the pendant closer to the light. The smallest pup moved toward it. Then the largest. All 3 stared at the crest. Mara's heart began beating faster. "Where did you get this?" The pups could not answer. Of course they could not. But something about their silence felt like an answer anyway. A sudden sound came from outside. Horses. Mara's smile vanished. She hurried to the window. 4 riders entered the village. Then 6. Then more. Their armor carried the silver wolf of Frostmere. Royal soldiers. Mara stepped backward. The smallest pup growled. "Quiet." She gathered the pendant and pushed it beneath her clothing. Outside, the village bell began to ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. Doors opened. People hurried into the street. Mara could hear frightened voices. "They're royal soldiers. Why are they here?" Something happened in the northern forest. Then a louder voice cut through the noise. "By order of the Alpha King, no house is to be searched without permission from Captain Darius." Mara's stomach tightened. She looked at the 3 pups. They were no longer playful. The largest stood between Mara and the door. The white crescent pup pressed against her ankle. Then someone shouted from outside. "Search the Omega's cottage first." Mara closed her eyes. Of course. Of all the houses in the village, They had chosen hers. The door opened without a knock. The village elder stepped inside with 2 soldiers behind him. His eyes immediately fell upon the pups. His face changed.
There.
Mara stood. Please. Where did you get them? They were injured. Those are wolves from the northern forest. I know. You know the law. Mara said nothing. The elder pointed toward the pups. You have been warned for years. Wolves bring death to this village. The smallest pup moved closer to Mara. One soldier reached for it. The largest pup bared its teeth. The soldier stopped. Interesting. Mara stepped between them. They're frightened. They're wild. They're dying. The elder's expression hardened. Perhaps they should have died. Something inside Mara broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. She looked at the man who had blamed her for nearly every tragedy in her life. Then she looked at the 3 creatures she had kept alive with her last pieces of firewood. No. The word was quiet. But it was firm. The soldier reached for the pup. Mara grabbed the iron poker from beside the hearth. For the first time, the soldiers looked surprised. Then the smallest pup ran. Not toward the door. Toward the fireplace. It shoved its nose beneath a loose stone. Mara stared. The pup pulled something free. A narrow strip of old leather. The elder stepped forward. What is that? Mara picked it up. Before she could open it, a horn sounded outside. Then another. The soldiers turned. Someone shouted from the street. They found the tracks. The elder looked at Mara. Take her. Mara did not wait. She grabbed her cloak, the pendant, and the 3 pups. Then she ran through the back door. Behind her, the village bell began ringing again. This time, it was not a warning. It was the alarm. The Alpha King's soldiers had found the trail. And Mara was running directly toward the mountains with the 3 creatures they had spent 2 years searching for. The forest swallowed Mara before the soldiers could catch her. She ran until her lungs burned. The pups followed as best they could, their paws sinking into deep snow. The smallest stumbled. Mara scooped it up. The largest kept moving beside her. The white crescent pup remained close enough that its shoulder brushed her leg with every step. Behind them came the distant sounds of horses. Mara knew she could not outrun soldiers forever. She needed somewhere they would not think to search. Her mother had once told her about an abandoned sanctuary hidden in the mountains. An old place. Older than the kingdom. Older, some said, than the royal family itself. Mara had never believed the stories. Now she had no choice. She climbed. The forest became steeper. Trees thinned. Wind grew stronger. By late afternoon, her boots were soaked and her fingers had gone numb. At last, a wall of grey stone appeared through the snow. A narrow doorway stood beneath a carved wolf's head. Mara pushed it open. Warm air touched her face. She stared. An old man sat beside a small fire. His white hair reached his shoulders. His eyes were sharp despite his age. He looked first at Mara. Then at the pups. Then at the pendant around her neck. The bowl in his hand slipped onto the floor. Where did you find them? Mara tightened her arms around the smallest pup. Beneath a fallen pine. The old man's face went pale. No. He stood. Slowly. As though his knees had forgotten how. He approached the largest pup. The animal sniffed his hand. The old man looked at the silver mark behind its ear. Then the second. Then the crescent on the third. His eyes filled with tears. They're alive. Mara stared at him. Who are they? The old man looked toward the carved wolf above the doorway. My name is Oren. He lowered himself onto the stone bench. I have guarded this sanctuary for 43 years. Mara waited. Oren's voice became quieter. 2 years ago, the Alpha King's 3 sons disappeared. Mara's fingers tightened around the pup. Everyone knows they died. Everyone was told they died. The fire popped. Outside, wind moved through the mountains. Oren looked at the 3 wolves. They were traveling north with their father when their convoy was attacked. The guards were killed. The horses were found scattered across the snow. No bodies were ever recovered. Then where were the princes? Oren looked directly at Mara. Hidden. Her heartbeat quickened. By whom? By magic. He pointed toward the 3 pups. The ancient wolf bond can hide royal blood when the heirs are threatened. It changes the body, masks the scent, makes them appear as ordinary wolves. Mara stared. The smallest pup looked up at her. Its eyes seemed suddenly older. They were children. Young princes. Why didn't the king find them? Because someone made sure he wouldn't. Oren's voice hardened. Lord Vaelor. Mara recognized the name. Every village knew it. The Alpha King's most trusted commander. A decorated warrior. A man praised in songs. Oren's expression darkened. He arranged the attack. Mara shook her head. Why? Power. One word. Simple. Cruel. Vaelor knew that if the 3 princes died, the kingdom would eventually need a new heir. He intended to control whoever came after the king. Mara looked at the pups. So he tried to kill children. He did more than that. Oren reached beneath his robe and pulled out an old piece of parchment. He ordered the royal guards to burn every record connecting the princes to this sanctuary. Mara stared at the parchment. But why did the wolves bring them to me? Oren's eyes softened. Because of what you are. Mara stiffened. An Omega. Not merely an Omega. He looked at her hands. Your mother came from the old northern line. Mara remembered her mother's quiet stories. The strange herbs. The way wounded birds had sometimes rested in her palms. The way frightened animals had never attacked her. She had thought those things were coincidence. Oren shook his head. Your blood carries the old calming bond. Wolves recognize it. Mara looked down. The smallest prince had fallen asleep against her chest. For the first time in her life, something about being an Omega did not feel like a curse. Then a sound echoed through the sanctuary. A horn. Oren froze. Another horn answered from below. Mara rose. How did they find us? Oren looked toward the mountains. Someone told them. The pups began growling. Oren hurried toward the doorway. Below the sanctuary, torchlights appeared through the snow. Dozens. Then dozens more. Vaelor's soldiers had found them. And the sanctuary had only one entrance. Fire consumed the sanctuary behind them. Mara could still feel its heat on her back as she climbed the frozen pass with Oren and the 3 princes. Snow whipped across the mountainside. Every breath burned. Oren limped beside her, leaning heavily on a wooden staff. We need to reach the eastern ridge, he said. Why? Because the king is there. Mara looked toward the valley. How do you know? His army has been searching the northern forests for weeks. The smallest prince stumbled. Mara stopped. His hurt. We cannot stop. Mara looked at Oren. Then at the pup. Then back at the flames below. I won't leave him. She lifted the prince into her arms. The little body trembled beneath her cloak. Mara kept climbing. Her boots began to bleed. She could feel warm blood inside her socks. But she did not stop. The other 2 pups stayed beside her. At one point, the largest disappeared behind a rock. Mara's heart jumped. Then he reappeared carrying a strip of cloth in his mouth. Oren stared at it. Royal cloth. Blue and silver. That belonged to Prince Kael, he whispered. Mara looked at the pup. The animal lowered the cloth onto the snow. Memory. Some part of him remembered. They continued. Hours passed. At last, the ridge appeared. And beyond it stood an ancient stone bridge stretching over a deep ravine. A massive white wolf stood at its center. Mara stopped. The creature was enormous. Its fur shone beneath the moonlight. Its eyes were pale gold. A silver crown marked its forehead. The 3 pups immediately lowered themselves. The white wolf stepped forward. Mara expected a growl. Instead, it lowered its head. A strange warmth moved through her chest. Not words. Not exactly. Images. A palace. 3 children laughing. A young king holding them. A dark forest. Fire. Men with swords. 3 small bodies running into the snow. Then darkness. Mara gasped. The vision vanished. The white wolf turned toward the eastern valley. Mara followed its gaze. Torches. Hundreds. An army. And at the center rode a black horse. A man in a dark cloak sat upon it. The Alpha King. Mara had seen his face on coins and banners. But the man in the valley looked nothing like the portraits. He looked tired. Older. A father who had spent 2 years searching for children the world told him were dead. Mara's heart tightened. They're his sons. Oren nodded. Before Mara could speak again, another movement appeared across the ridge. Soldiers. Vaelor's men. The white wolf turned. A low growl rolled through the mountains. Mara looked from the king's army to the approaching soldiers. For one fragile moment, she believed they were safe. Then Vaelor raised his sword. His soldiers charged. And the Alpha King, still unaware of what was happening above him, looked toward the mountain just as the first arrow flew. The arrow struck the stone beside Mara. She dropped to the ground. The 3 princes scattered. Stay together. Her voice disappeared beneath the roar of the wind. Soldiers climbed the ridge. Oren pulled Mara behind a stone wall. The Alpha King's army was moving below, but the terrain separated them. Then a command rang across the mountain. Take the woman alive. Mara looked up. Vaelor stood among the soldiers. His face was calm. Almost gentle. That frightened her more than rage would have. He walked closer. You have caused enough trouble. Mara held the smallest prince against her chest. They're not yours. Vaelor smiled. No. His eyes moved toward the animals. They belong to the kingdom. The Alpha King's soldiers reached the ridge. Steel flashed. Men surrounded Mara. Then the Alpha King appeared. He dismounted slowly. His gaze went first to the 3 wolves. Something changed in his face. Hope. Terrible, fragile hope. He took 1 step forward. The largest pup looked at him. The king stopped breathing. Kale. The wolf moved. 1 step. Then another. But Vaelor stepped between them. My king. The Alpha King's eyes hardened. What is this? Vaelor pointed toward Mara. This woman stole the royal wolves. Mara stared at him. That's a lie. She was found with them. I saved them. She claims they are your sons. The king looked at Mara. There was no anger in his eyes. Only exhaustion. You know who they are. Mara swallowed. I know they're yours. The words seemed to break something inside him. He looked at the 3 wolves again. His hand trembled. For 2 years, he had searched. 2 years of empty rooms. 2 years of unopened toys. 2 years of waking from dreams in which he heard his sons calling for him. And now 3 frightened wolves stood in the snow. His guards approached. The pups backed away. The king reached out. The smallest prince ran past him. Straight to Mara. The other 2 followed. They pressed against her legs. One climbed onto her cloak. The king stared. His face crumpled for half a second before he forced it still. They don't know you. Mara whispered. They know who kept them alive. The king's eyes lifted. Their gazes met. For the first time, Mara saw no disgust when someone looked at her. Only gratitude. Then Vaelor spoke. Oren. The old guardian stepped forward. Vaelor pointed at him. He is the traitor who helped the princes disappear. Oren's face went white. No. Vaelor produced a sealed document. His confession. The king took it. Mara watched his expression change. Oren shook his head. I never wrote that. Vaelor's soldiers moved toward him. Mara stepped forward. Wait. The king looked at her. You have 1 chance to tell me why I should trust you. Mara looked at the pups. Then at Oren. Then at Vaelor. I don't know how to make you trust me. Her voice trembled. But I know what happened when I found them. She told him about the fallen pine. The cold. The blood. The tiny hearts that almost stopped. She told him she had used her own cloak, her own firewood, her own food. She told him that when the soldiers came, she could have surrendered. Instead, she ran. The king listened. Vaelor's expression remained calm. Then the oldest prince stepped forward. The silver mark on his ear began to glow. The air changed. Mara felt warmth spread through the mountain. The wolf's body shuddered. Silver light moved across its fur. The soldiers stepped backward. The king whispered his son's name. The wolf changed. Bone shifted. Fur disappeared. A young boy fell into the snow. The Alpha King caught him. For one heartbeat, neither moved. Then the boy buried his face against his father's chest. The king dropped to his knees. His arms closed around his son. A sound escaped him. Not the sound of a king. The sound of a father who had finally been allowed to grieve and rejoice at the same time. The second prince transformed. Then the third. Mara covered her mouth. The three boys were alive. Vaelor's face changed. For the first time, fear appeared. The king slowly rose. He looked at his sons. Then at Mara. Then at Vaelor. Where were they taken? Vaelor said nothing. The king's voice became colder. Where were my sons taken? Still silence. Then Oren spoke. The shrine. Everyone turned. The truth is beneath the ancient royal shrine. Vaelor drew his sword. And suddenly every torch on the mountain went out. Darkness swallowed the mountain. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the wolves began howling. One from the forest. Another from the valley. Then hundreds. The sound rolled across Frostmere like thunder. The Alpha King looked toward the ancient shrine. Move. They traveled before dawn. The princes rode with their father. Mara walked beside Oren. Neither spoke for a long time. At sunrise, the shrine appeared through the snow. It stood inside a circle of ancient stones, half buried beneath ice. The wolves had gathered there. White wolves. Grey wolves. Black wolves. Old wolves with scars across their faces. Young wolves still learning to walk. They stood silently around the shrine. Waiting. The three princes dismounted. The wolves lowered their heads. The Alpha King stared. Mara watched him place one hand on each son's shoulder. The family stood together beneath the ancient stone arch. For the first time, they looked complete. Then Oren approached the shrine wall. He pressed his palm against a carved wolf. Stone moved. A hidden chamber opened. Inside lay a wooden chest. Vaelor suddenly charged. Mara saw him before anyone else did. He reached for the chest. She stepped into his path. He shoved her aside. Mara fell against the stone. Pain shot through her shoulder. Vaelor grabbed the chest. But one of the princes ran forward. The oldest boy shouted, "Stop!" Vaelor froze. The king drew his sword. "Put it down." Vaelor turned. His face had finally lost its calm. "You think this changes anything?" The king stepped forward. "You murdered my guards." Vaelor laughed bitterly. "I removed obstacles. You tried to kill my children. They were obstacles too." Silence. The words echoed beneath the shrine. The king's sword lowered slightly. Not from mercy. From shock. Vaelor opened the chest. Then let the kingdom hear the truth. Inside were records. Names. Orders. Royal seals. Payments. Everything. Oren picked up the first document. His hands shook. "These are the original orders." The king took them. He read. Then another. Then another. His face became still. Vaelor stepped backward. Mara saw the movement. He was looking for an escape. She moved toward the chamber entrance. Vaelor rushed toward it. Mara blocked him. He grabbed her arm. She stumbled. For a moment, fear returned. Then three wolves appeared behind her. The princes. Not boys. Not transformed. Wolves. They stood shoulder to shoulder. Vaelor released her. The Alpha King stepped forward. "You wanted power." Vaelor looked around at the wolves. At the princes. At the evidence. At the king. You have no idea what this kingdom requires. The king's answer was quiet. It requires men who do not murder children to reach a throne. Vaelor was arrested before noon. The trial lasted 3 days. The evidence was undeniable. His rank was stripped. His lands were taken. And the man who had spent 2 years hiding behind loyalty was finally forced to face the families of the guards he had sacrificed. Mara watched from the edge of the royal hall. She did not enjoy his punishment. She simply felt the weight of something finally being set right. Then the Alpha King approached her. "You saved my sons." Mara lowered her eyes. "They needed someone." "No." His voice softened. "They needed you." Mara did not know what to say. The king offered her a place at the royal sanctuary. A room. Protection. A position among the healers. A life inside the palace. Mara looked toward the tall windows. Beyond them stretched the northern forest. The place where she had always been called cursed. The place where 3 dying creatures had changed her life. "I would rather stay near the wolves." The king smiled. "Then that is where you will stay." Years passed. The village that had once called Mara a curse began bringing her injured animals. Children came to learn about herbs. Travelers stopped to hear stories about the Omega who had saved the lost princes. Mara never became a queen. She never wanted a crown. She became something the kingdom had needed for generations without realizing it. A guardian. A healer. A woman who taught people that kindness could be stronger than fear. The 3 princes grew into young men. But every winter, when the first snow covered the northern forest, they returned to Mara's cottage. Sometimes they came as princes. Sometimes they came as wolves. And they always slept beside the same old hearth. The smallest still followed Mara from room to room. The largest still watched the door. And the one with the white crescent still stared toward the mountains whenever the moon was full. Many years later, children in Frostmere would gather around their grandparents during the first winter storm and hear the same story. They would hear about 3 royal princes who disappeared. About a cruel commander who wanted a throne. About an ancient wolf magic that hid 3 children beneath the shape of wolves. But most of all, they would hear about an Omega whom everyone had hated. An Omega who owned almost nothing. An Omega who had been blamed for everything. An Omega who could have walked away when she found 3 dying pups beneath a fallen pine. But she didn't. She gave them her cloak. She gave them her firewood. She gave them the little food she had. And when the world came looking for them, she ran into the snow instead of surrendering them. One winter night, long after the kingdom had become peaceful, Mara sat outside her cottage beneath a silver moon. Snow covered the roof. The forest was quiet. Then 3 shapes emerged between the trees. 3 silver wolves. They walked toward her without making a sound. Mara smiled. The largest lowered his head into her lap. The smallest curled against her boots. The one with the white crescent sat beside her and looked toward the mountains. Mara rested one hand on his fur. For a while, nobody moved. There were no soldiers. No accusations. No bells. No fear. Only the soft sound of snow falling through the trees. Mara looked at the 3 wolves and remembered the night she had found them. She remembered how small they had been. How cold. How close to death. She remembered thinking she had nothing to give them. And yet somehow, she had given them everything they needed. A home. A fire. A reason to keep breathing. The largest wolf lifted his head. Far across the forest, another wolf howled. Then another answered. Mara closed her eyes. The sound traveled over the mountains and across the kingdom. And somewhere inside the royal fortress, 3 grown princes heard it. They smiled. Because some bonds were older than crowns. Some families were found rather than inherited. And sometimes the person everyone had learned to hate was the one who carried the greatest kindness in the entire kingdom. Mara opened her eyes. The moonlight rested on the snow. 3 silver wolves remained beside her. And for the first time in her life, she knew without doubt that she belonged somewhere. Not because a king had given her a place. Not because the kingdom had finally forgiven her. But because on the coldest night of her life, when 3 dying pups needed someone to choose them, she had chosen them. And they had chosen her back. Forever.